I am so glad. Oh, we've advertised this.
So we get a ring size seat here.
I don't know. It's okay. I just use your
So if you sit in it, you'll sit down.
I know, and that's I am so sorry.
I actually was impressed with it. They were good because it was, did you see how convincing it was? I mean, it was like, I don't think so. But it was so detailed that I thought, well, you know, I've never ever been even close to, you know. So I just wrote this thing back to see what they would say, and they remained really polite the whole first 2 hours. Wild. Yeah.
I know how I'm gonna.
Oh.
I got my boyfriend. But I had a party and I did have a party about 5 years ago. In Seattle, at a place that had a very confusing sign, so I contested it.
I actually really think AI was involved in this. I think they used AI to research a valid thing. We just need to not press links in email ever.
Right. That's all I did was press the link.
Yeah.
And that's all I did. Stop off this whole file.
But it was really clear. I mean, I sort of feel that part of it, like some admiration actually for, you know, the job they did on that. But, did anyone else?
Oh, yeah. A whole bunch of people.
Did anyone actually?
Nobody, I don't think anybody else responded. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
They just asked me.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Yeah. What? And I didn't have your contact information, and I didn't have time to go look it up on the thing.
Yeah.
So I think I said it to Brad instead.
Yeah.
But
Well, I'm glad you did, because other people said that too. First I was wondering, why aren't people contacting me? But he thinks that somebody got into the church's email system.
yeah, that's why.
It's just people from church.
Oh, is it? Okay,
Anybody
so
else.
it's
Thank
once
God.
again the church somehow.
Yeah.
You know, wow. I mean, they have different sources of information in it that are. It's just. Anyway, no, I'm sort of fascinated more than anything. Yeah, I'll bet if I were the victim of it, I'd be more. Yeah. Anyway, no worries on my side. I'm just
My nurses there at the hospital, the zips are a lot better than no zips are at all. If I get stuck there, then tomorrow was 350.
I know, there's bitterness. Oh, yeah. Very and growing bitterness, so we can't make reservations today. It is hard.
Is there water on the
Don't they really? They will. Yeah. So Sunday morning at So come on in and take a seat if you want, and you don't have to. We are in Campbell Hall, so as you all know, what that means is flexible seating choices. If you're in a spot, the sun hits you in the wrong way, or you need to come closer to here, or you decide you need a more comfortable chair, please move. The point of this hour that we have with the Reverend Canon Christy Chapman is to hear from her and then allow plenty of time for your good questions. So I want to welcome Christy, I'm going to call you Christy, Canon Christy, to St. Augustine's in the Woods. We had sort of a failed attempt on June 1st when you were scheduled to preach and preside, now a month ago today. And what Christy said is as she drove into the parking lot, she just feels a whole lot better physically today than she did a month ago. And let me, yes. But I did get so many compliments, and I want to make sure everybody hears this on your sermon. So anyway, we are so fortunate to have you here. Christy does have a ferry to catch, not back to the mainland, but up in the San Juan Islands, which I will take the opportunity to say it's worse than coming over from. So we do want to honor everyone's time, and we will try to end pretty promptly at 5:30. So with that, yay, welcome.
All right, friends, it is good to be with all of you for this hour as we talk a little bit about transition and what your questions are as this congregation discerns the Spirit and where the Spirit is pulling and tugging and inviting all of you to follow. I do want to open with a word of prayer, and then I can do a brief introduction, and then I will then kind of launch into my part of the conversation.
Did you put the microphone?
Yeah, thank you. Yes. I may just hold it.
Yes.
I have
It's
one of
the
those
best.
voices, so. All right, friends, God be with you.
And also,
Let us pray. Oh, gracious and holy God, for this day we give you thanks. As you gather us together in communities across this diocese and on this island and in South Whitby. Be with us. Help us to know that you are stirring your Spirit in each one of us and in us as a diocese. Help us to take the time and to practice curiosity as we listen for those stirrings of the Spirit. Help us to do the work that you would have us to do, which sometimes feels vast. And yet you help us to know which pieces of that work we are ready to do now and which pieces we can lay down for later. As we come together in this place this afternoon, stir your Spirit in each one of us so that we have ears to hear and hearts to follow and voices to ask those questions that are close on our hearts and in our minds this night. All this we ask and offer in the name of Jesus, the one who we follow. Amen.
Amen.
All right, friends. So my name is Christy Chapman, and I serve as the new canon to the ordinary in the Diocese of Olympia. I have been in this role for 7 months. So Bishop Phil asked me to serve in this role in last fall, and I said yes to that and began in December, not long after he started. So you have a new bishop and a new canon to the ordinary, and we are absolutely delighted with the calls that you as a diocese have invited us to step into. And we're learning, and so I am grateful to each one of you because you will help us do this work more faithfully, and you do your work as faithfully as you can too. A little bit about me. So my last call, I think many of you know that my last call was on San Juan Island. I was the rector at St. David's Friday Harbor. Jenny and I started about the same time, and Jenny and I will end up serving in our calls as rectors of these congregations for about the same amount of time. And so I have some sense about what it is like to live on an island. And it is an amazing thing, and it can be a particularly interesting and sometimes challenging thing. And so I'm really grateful to be able to accompany you guys in this transition too, knowing that that is one of the things that we share as well. I have also served calls at the Mission to Seafarers in Seattle and in Tacoma, and at St. Mark's Cathedral. So I was a curate and a canon at the cathedral. And prior to that, for many years, I was a director of cost accounting at the University of Washington. Yay! So I have a varied and interesting experience, as I think we each do. Those of us who are ordained and those of us who aren't ordained. So just a little bit about me. All right. So I have a handful of things that I want to talk about transition, and then I'm going to try to leave a lot of time for questions. And as I go through my brief part of the presentation, if you cannot hear me, please let me know, and I will try to hold the microphone closer. Okay, so transition. So you all find yourselves in the early stages of pastoral transition. Jenny has discerned that it is time for a new ministry to start stirring in her heart. And there's new ministry that is stirring in yours as well. And so, August 3rd is your last Sunday. Yes. So transitions. I like to say that there are 4 stages of transition, whether a congregation decides to call a priest in charge or an interim. 4 main stages of transition. And you guys are in that first one right now, where your beloved rector has said that she is ready to step away. And so there's lots of emotion that comes with that particular stage, from shock, although I think you guys are probably over kind of that initial shock at this point, to grieving, to mourning, to celebrating. Brad and I talked briefly before I got here, before we started this part of the presentation, about some of the work that the vestry is doing, and this recognition that you guys have done a lot of work, a lot of faithful spiritual work in these last 2 years. And so some of what happens and needs to happen in this stage of transition is that you celebrate that. And so celebrating it with each other, celebrating it with Jenny, having Jenny reflect back to what she has noticed in these couple of years, 2.5, almost 3 years since Jenny came. And the other key piece of this is about lead taking. And you guys are doing that right now. You are celebrating, you are mourning, and you are wondering and listening to the call of the Spirit, so that you can say thank you well, and that you can practice lead taking well. I will say that the way that congregations say goodbye to their clergy says a lot about how they get ready to welcome new clergy. And so, if you don't lean heavily and faithfully into the work of lead taking, it will make it much, much more difficult for a new clergy person and for the congregation to be able to welcome that new clergy person. So sometimes it may not feel like fun work, but it's critically important work. I like to say that the very first story in Genesis, the very first creation story, was in fact one of the last ones that was written. And so our scriptures, the last story that was written was really, or the first story that we read was in fact one of the very last ones written, and really kind of helps set the overall stage for what it is that we are called to do. So the way that you say goodbye says a lot about how you're going to say hello and welcome to a new clergy person. So along with that first stage, another key piece is the vestry doing discernment work around whether they want to call a priest in charge or an interim, and also working with us in the office of the bishop to make sure that we're comfortable with that. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, because that decision has now been made, and I understand that you guys found out about that. Brad has communicated that to the congregation earlier today. So then the second stage is doing some discernment work around who it is that you are in this moment and what goals are well enough. So whether it's a congregation that is going to go through a full search or a congregation that's going to call a priest in charge, every congregation needs to do really intentional discernment work about who it is that you are right now and what you're looking for in either a priest in charge or in a rector. And your vestry, you guys are discerning how you're going to do that work. It's really important for people to be able to fully participate in that work as a congregation, so that clergy people who are discerning whether they want to come and walk alongside you in this work have a better sense about who you are and whether their skills and gifts align with the needs and the hopes of a congregation. And so sometime in the next couple of months, roughly, the vestry is going to put together what I call a mini profile. That's my language. There is nothing official about that other than to say it's really kind of a short 2-page summary about who you are and what you're hoping to accomplish with the priest in charge. So that's the second stage or phase. Third stage, names come. Because you guys have made the decision to have a priest in charge, the vestry will actually do the work of reading resumes and discerning and interviewing candidates who express interest in coming to walk alongside you guys as a priest in charge. Congregations that go through full search, you will know that part is kind of the call committee or the search committee. But in this particular case, because it's a priest in charge you guys are going to call, that work falls to the vestry. And so they will do that with a lot of intention and a lot of support from us as well to make sure that they have what they need as they're going through their discernment. And then the last stage, which is also kind of the first stage of the next part of transition, is calling in and welcoming a new clergy person. So I think a lot of people think that once you call somebody, transition is over. In fact, exactly, I see that. In fact, it starts in a new way, because at that point, you get to figure out who this new clergy person is. You get to start building a relationship with that person. They start to build a relationship with all of you as well. And then the next phase of ministry starts. So discerning goals, leaning into those goals, doing that work of mutual ministry. So at a really high level, those are the 4 stages. And they're the same regardless of whether you call priest in charge or you call a rector. What is different is that with a priest in charge, it is a much shorter process. And I don't know when you guys will have a priest in charge in place, but my hope would be that it would be sometime maybe by the end of the calendar year. Maybe a little bit sooner, and maybe a little bit later. I don't know. But in the congregations so far that I have accompanied, who have been discerning priest in charge, it has been roughly 6 to 9 months compared to usually 18 months to 2 years of beautiful search. So that's one of the differences there. All right, so high level. I'm going to see if people have questions just generally about the phases of transition. And let's do a couple of questions. Yeah.
I didn't
know about that decision, so I'm curious about how it was, the information was disseminated, but that's a second.
Oh, sure.
What?
It's easier. Then you don't have to come. Whatever's easier.
Oh, so the question
No,
is...
that's not my question. My question is, what are the 2 different, what's a priest in charge versus an interim?
Oh, in terms of just generally what that is?
Yeah, like,
Okay.
or why we are picking that one.
It's a good question.
Yeah. So the differences between a priest in charge, that actually is a good question. So priest in charge versus interim. So a priest in charge is a clergy person who your vestry will call to come alongside you. That person and the vestry have the option after roughly 2.5 to 3 years to call that person as the permanent rector. Versus an interim, where an interim will come and walk alongside you for that full period of transition, typically 18 months to 2 years, and the interim generally says that they will not put their name into the record. So the interim is there for a very short period of time and then leaves, and has very specific work to do with congregations to get them ready to then call another clergy person to then come as the rector.
So with the priest in charge, at the end where the priest is, yeah, okay, I will stay, we also have a decision to make. It's not a given that they just get to stay.
Exactly, yes. So the question is, if you call a priest in charge, it's not just a given that that person will stay. And the answer to that is absolutely. So it is a mutual discernment. And so the clergy person, and I like to say this to congregations, both the clergy person and the congregation specifically the vestry, are discerning whether there is a mutual call there. Some congregations that I have worked with assume that once you call a priest in church, they're going to want to stay. That's not necessarily the case. You guys are dating each other. That's a kind of rough, imperfect analogy. But there is this opportunity for both the clergy person and the congregation to see if there is in fact a fit there that is a longer term fit that then turns into.
So it's a very good idea on an island, right? Because this is a different living situation. It's a really good idea, right?
Exactly. So, yeah.
So when you get a priest in charge and they're here for, you said, a couple of years, and then comes a decision, who makes that decision? Just the vestry, or is it the entire congregation?
So that's an excellent question. So what is the process for making a decision when it's time to call a priest in church? So it is the vestry's call. And so the vestry will be the ones who will do their discernment in consultation and in conversation with the congregation, however that happens. But they're not going to go out and do that work by themselves, isolated from the work and the ministry that's happening within the congregation. But /and it is to say every call in the Episcopal Church, whether it is a call as a rector or a call as a priest in church, is always extended on behalf of the vestry. So the vestry votes to elect a rector, and that is the process. And canonically, that is what is.
Is there some organizational process where the vestry speaks to the congregation in a formal way, not just, we're going to have coffee with 8 people here and talk about it, but like there's opportunity for congregational members to come forward and speak with vestry members so that there's a real discernment about what the congregation feels.
Yes, I would imagine so. And formal, I'm going to say formal in the sense that there is a particular way that we would hope that that discernment is happening congregation-wide, and we're not going to give you a prescriptive way of doing that. So,
If I could just speak to that,
absolutely.
you know,
You should have the mic.
Yeah.
Excellent question. And yes, no, the vestry does not work in a vacuum, and we can't do it without engagement with the congregation. So yes, of course, you have our pledge that we will be engaged with you around that decision. So no, we don't act as the secret committee that meets off to the side.
One of the other things that I will say too about the decision between priest in charge versus interim/rector is that that's also a decision where the bishop and I talk and with each other about what seems to make sense given the current context in a given congregation, and we talk with the vestry or with the bishop's committee in smaller congregations. So it is a dialogue and it is a discernment in terms of which path congregations decide they might go down. And so that is all to say that it is not, this decision is not one that has been made in a vacuum. The vestry has done a lot of discernment in the last month, actually probably longer than that, but it's been about, I think, a month since we had our conversation. It was 3 weeks since we had our conversation. And they have done a lot of deep discernment about which path they would like to take and when. So. All right, so we're talking about who's in charge at this point. So, what questions do you guys have about that? Yeah.
Did you say, did you say talking about priesthood?
Yeah, exactly.
That decision has been made.
That decision has been made, yes, exactly. Brad, I don't know if you want to say more for people who have not.
I'm not sure everybody has seen it.
Yeah.
No, that's right.
Yeah. So there was an email that went out, but I think it probably went out this afternoon. So if you late breaking news.
Yeah, late breaking news, but as was announced last week, and on Sunday, there was going to be a special meeting in the vestry last night. The vestry met last evening, and we spent an hour and a half of deliberation. And yes, at the end of that meeting, did vote to recommend that we pursue a priest in charge. And then I put together that information in constant contact, which went out about noon today. So
And it was unanimous.
it was a unanimous decision on the part of the vestry last evening. It was not an informed decision, no, and we had a chance to meet with Canon Chapman at our last vestry meeting. And then we've had conversations as well. We have also had an opportunity to look at what that process has looked like in other churches in our diocese. And then, of course, we've had 2 forums where we've discussed those as well. And I try and keep as much information as I can flowing through the weekly Wednesday newsletter. And we do have a special page on our website now that has all of the transition information. So yes, it's been a month-long process of doing that, and we came to that decision last night. Dick, did you?
Yeah, as I recall, when I was in the vestry, and we selected Joan, I guess the interim, right? That's what, yeah, by definition, that's what we had there. Okay, and basically, the bishop said, this person, I think would be good for you to, as an interim, and we, agreed. Now for a priest in charge, though, is this kind of like a mini calling?
That's a good question. Yeah.
It is, yeah. Priest in charge is kind of like a main call, so, and one that is done, it is a shorter time frame, and it's one of the things that Brad and I talk about, and I talk about this with every congregation that is discerning for a priest in charge. Just because it is a shorter process does not mean it is a process that you need to rush. And my sense after talking to the vestry here is that you guys will take the time that you need to develop this kind of mini profile, really this statement of identity and statement of goals. And then working with our office, with the office of the bishop, and particularly with me, to do the work, to hold open the posting as long as possible so that there are a number of qualified candidates that we are then sending on to the vestry. And the vestry will do as much, they will take as much time as they need to make that call. So.
Actually, I've already talked once.
Okay, all right.
But
Well, my question is, the candidates, once they've been vetted, are all of the candidates sent to us, or is there a certain number sent to us?
So that's a good question. So Rich and I have talked some about this. I think it is his hope that all of the candidates will be forwarded to a congregation, to the vestry, or to a call committee, unless there is a candidate for whom the bishop would object to that person coming into the diocese because there's a disciplinary issue and we don't want that person in the diocese. So that's the long way of saying, well, not the long way of saying, yes, he will get all, the vestry will get all of the names. So.
how big is the pool?
Well, I don't know. So I think that's the honest answer. I don't know. And what I will say, so some context about other congregations in the diocese who are going through full search and who are also discerning priests in church. So most of the congregations who I am working with at this point that are in transition have elected to go with the priest in church model. They're congregations that are what we call grade C and lower. So medium-sized to smaller-sized congregations that are relatively healthy and have somewhat recently been through transition already. Those are congregations that are now going through for priest in church. Our larger, I will say, because this question in fact came up with the vestry. For our largest congregations, so our grade A and grade B congregations, I don't think we would probably have a priest in charge. I think in those particular cases, we would always recommend an interim. We're not going to have a priest in charge when Dean Steve retires or when he leaves St. Mark's. That will be a full-blown search process. So the search process at Epiphany, whenever that search process comes. So this is an option for congregations who are mid-sized to very small congregations. And there are currently 9 congregations in this diocese, so roughly 10% of the congregations that have a priest in charge, where the congregation and the clergy person are currently discerning a mutual call. That's a lot. That's a lot. So, and then we have another congregation right now that's discerning whether they will go down the priest in charge versus interim path. And then another congregation, St. Barnabas, which is one of those large congregations that will in fact have an interim, have just called an interim, and at some point they will call it. So that's a little bit of context
So
for
is
the diocese.
there's like a job posting
There
within a
is.
certain community. So is
Yeah.
it nationwide? Is it international? Is
Yeah, so what happens is, so the way that we are posting, especially for our priest in charge positions at this point, is we will put it on our diocesan transitions website. So I have a website that I maintain with all of the congregations that are looking for clergy. So it will go there, and then we have the ability to post it nationally through the Episcopal News Service. And so, so we will work with the vestry, and if they would like us to do that, then we will post it that way. I will say that Redeemer Kenmore is a congregation that has just, about a month ago, made the decision to have a priest in charge. And we posted it for a month. There are 3 clergy who have applied for that position in this diocese. That's a lot. Or at least it seems like a lot to me. And so, yeah, so I've been pleasantly
So we
surprised by
really
that.
have a special issue as an island
Yeah.
around this.
Yeah, and I will say too, I have had conversations, there are several of my colleagues who have already reached out to me about this particular call, so, yeah. So I've not had those conversations yet, but there are people who are quite interested in anything coming here, so.
So when you post these job opportunities, do you say, because we have some really specific qualities here, we could call them needs, but they are intensely important. One of them is that we live on an island. Another one is housing is a real big problem. People can't afford to buy a house here. Another is we have an aging community. And whoever is that priest in charge is going to need help. So the thought of a deacon kind of person is in the distant thought of my mind. And so somebody needs to know if they're considering this place as a job, it's not a 20-word job opportunity.
Exactly, and so I'm glad you said that too. So I think that this is part of the work of the name profile, which is who are we as St. Augustine's in the Woods, and here are some qualities about us and some things that will be helpful for people to know, and there will be a short summary of that. I will also have conversations with people, so the bishop and I will meet with people who are interested in putting their names in. And so this will be one of the things that I will talk to them about. And having lived on an island that does not have a bridge, I know about what it means to live. And I will talk to people about that and also about housing, but I will try to do it in a way that is inviting, but also there's some realism. Yeah, exactly. And our folks in Bainbridge Island at St. Barnabas, beautiful island, extremely expensive to live in, and so this will be one of the things that they too are discerning and talking to their candidates about. And I think all of Western Washington, we have real issues with housing justice in this part of the country, and we need to be honest with candidates about that. So, yeah, thank you.
Piggybacking on that, which I also told Rusty I was going to say today, about housing justice, living on an island, and this real fear that we will continue to have turnover. Because of that, I'm so pleased that we're doing the priest in charge so that they can live into it. And I know that Bishop Phil is really into clergy support, clergy support is very important. Is there work done with communities, with parishes that have not ever provided housing to develop a plan or to look at, for vestries to look at what would it take to actually secure housing for our clergy?
I think that's an excellent question, and it's a really good idea. We've not formally started to think about that, although I will say that there's at least one congregation in the diocese that's now actively talking about buying a rectory, and have a handful of people in the congregation who are willing to put the money up to buy a rectory, and that is not an option, I think, for many congregations, and so we need to be really intentional. And I think from a development and a congregational development and a clergy wellness perspective, those are things that we do need to be talking about. So,
How much of the profile will we have to redo if we've already done a lot of the work?
so that's the thing about the Christian church process, is that you will not have to redo a profile at all. You're just going to do, the ministry will work on this very short, abbreviated 2-page profile. I will say, and you guys, the vestry is going to, I'm sure, talk much more about this in the coming weeks. There's already been work done. I encourage the vestry to look at the last profile. I encourage every congregation in transition to look at their last profile. And what I heard them say is there are pieces of it that they really can identify with and see. And there are also things where they looked at it and said, oh my gosh, we've changed. Which is a good thing, because it says that what you guys set out to do together, you've actually been able to affect. And so this is one of the reasons why it's really good to go through this discernment process about who are you now and who is the Spirit calling you to be and to lean into from a whole perspective. So it's helpful, and it's not going to be a cookie cutter, what I used to say when I was auditing the Sally method, the same as last year. It's not the same as last year. So.
Well, just some history. I was on the vestry when a previous rector, who is much beloved, donated his dot, donated as a gift, a bequest, his house, and we, in our wisdom, sold it. There's a lot we can do, and I really think that. And then I was on the vestry and the ward during the transition, and it just seems like I've been an Episcopal a long time, and it's a funny church. There's two churches. When you have a rector, it's an eyes forward church. You keep your eyes on the rector. You listen. You're taking cues, and when you're in transition, it's all on you, and you are a first century church again, and figuring things out for the first time, and really trying to. If you don't know who you are, you can't go forward. So I'm a long-term union member, and I know that every time I go to the Union Hall in Mount Vernon, which is not very often, maybe once or twice a year, everybody knows my name. And when I've been on the vestry, I said, this is something we should emulate. We should know everybody's name in our congregation. So this is a special time for us as a congregation to get to know each other and reach out and make some new assessments about what the mission is.
One of the things that I will say too, in the vestry, you guys will know this. So I encourage the vestry to think about transition time as deeply spiritual work. And so I think when congregations lean really heavily into that as a spiritual practice, of being in transition as a spiritual practice, I think that changes. I think it changes the way that you frame the kind of this in-between liminal season. And it also invites a lot of wondering about how each person in the congregation is being changed and has already been changed. And so I would strongly encourage you guys to think about it that way. And you saying that it's, when you're in transition, it feels like you're the first century church. I think it's a beautiful way to think about it. So, yeah. So I have one other thought about housing. I'll get back to you. One of the things that I have seen, and I I'm gonna say this, Esther can ponder what you guys, or do with this whatever you want to do, but there are a handful of congregations in the diocese where they don't have what I know most congregations do not have rectories. I think we have 6 church-owned housing. The dean lives in church-owned housing, the bishop lives in church-owned housing, and I think there are 4 other congregations, 2 of which are on the same lots that have rectories. There are, however, a handful of other congregations that have done equity sharing agreements with the clergy, and so the congregation will put up some portion of the money to help a clergy person buy housing, and then, so the church owns part of the house, and the clergy owns part of the house, and then when that person gets ready to leave, to accept another call, the house is sold, and then whatever the difference is split. So that's a way of saying, be creative about this, and there are a handful of other options, and you need to have more, so.
My wondering here is about the pool, when you seek priests in charge, that you might be more heavily weighted toward somebody who's retired or about to retire, and at the other end, maybe somebody who's an associate. So, I don't know, is the history bear that, or is there?
Yeah, and again, this is where I've not been in this role long enough to have a long arc of experience. And the last call, so St. David's Friday has just announced that they called their priest in charge, and they had 2 candidates. Actually, there were 4 different people who ended up applying for that. 2 of them took calls outside of the diocese, fairly new clergy. There was another person who's got maybe 3 or 4 years of experience, and then the person who they ended up calling she has 10 years of experience and a young family. And so I was like, oh my goodness, that's such an unusual mix of people. And this other, with 3 people with just a very interesting, eclectic mix of experience. And nobody in that pool who was close to retiring. So, but yeah, so thank you for that question, because it's a really good one.
So I'm trying to picture, so there's a priest in charge who comes in who's not an interim, but not a fully hired person for the duration. And there's a period of some years, a couple of years, where we're all thinking about it. So we had a homeless priest from my point of view as a social service worker for much of the time, because it's not only buying a house, it's renting anything, you know? So what are people picturing for someone who's not even potentially, they don't know till kind of the end that they're not going to buy a house during that time. But a rental is also, I would be talking to her and she'd go, I gotta go because I have to move again to another, sofa, right? So.
Thank you for bringing that up. So I think if somebody's called as a rector, then the way that they start thinking about housing changes because they know that they're going to be there for some period of time versus somebody who is here potentially for only 3 years. That then means that the vestry is doing some different work to make sure that they've got good, secure housing. So.
Didn't Nigel live in something that I remember people saying that they went to clean his house out when he moved. Was that wrong?
He bought his own house.
He did
His
buy
own house.
He bought his own house. Okay,
Yeah.
so it was just people helping.
When he
him.
first came to us.
Okay.
No, I had the interim for a while. I had the interim before Nigel in my house for a while.
Okay.
All right, question.
Well, that solves it.
Just
You just live with
Caroline
people.
speaking to this.
Yeah, with the interim, we got to see involved. That's right. But that can go away.
And in fact, at St. Barnabas, they're navigating that right now. So their interim is not moving, but she will be on Bainbridge Island part of the time and in Fort Townsend for that reason. So, yeah, so we want to be flexible when it comes to housing. So, and do some work to be creative. All right, over there.
I just have to say, I can't hear half of what you say because you talk too fast.
Oh,
And I just heard from other people say you can't do it again.
okay, thank you. Oh, it's a comment about housing, as priest in church and interim are going to have the same challenges with housing in terms of not necessarily being ready to buy. And I guess one of the things that I will say too is for those rare congregations that have a rectory, that issue goes away. But that's a longer term question for congregations to discern. So
I thought the Episcopal Church was putting down rectories. They want the clergy building on home. I heard
opinions.
it.
My sending congregation, one of your vestry members and I were on the same vestry of that congregation, sold their rectory many years ago, and they regretted that decision. And then they bought another house. And so I think in places where the cost of living and the housing market is extremely, extremely expensive, I think that people are starting to re-examine that decision. So, and I think from the diocesan perspective, we want congregations to be able to call good rectors and good vicars. And if that means that there needs to be a housing solution for that person in order to attract them, then figure out the housing solution. So,
Good. I just wanted to speak to that, David, because I think I'm sorry. I think that trend of wanting to sell the rectories came because, priests come either with a family or they can come by themselves, or, so that often the size of the house didn't fit. And I think that as one who's gone through this 4 times, I think, that was why, again, this idea of 5 people going in on a house, that sounds really good.
And I think it's a reminder too that the church is always changing, and the way that we are discerning how best to be church and how best to support each other and how best to support our clergy is also changing and evolving. So, and I've heard that too at times. And I will say, I am fascinated that there is a congregation in the last week that has reached out to me about what they need to do to adjust their workers' compensation as they buy a house. And I'm like, this is amazing, and it's a good thing. Okay. Are there any questions online, folks?
There are no questions online at this point.
Okay, awesome.
I have another question.
Of course you do.
Just to know, I have a zillion questions, but I'm only asking a couple.
Spiritual discipline.
Diane's been an Episcopalian for like 3 months.
Yeah.
She's been a Christian for like...
Yeah, I've been a Christian, yeah. Well, enough about me. The land is just down below us. Is there any chance we could build a house on it?
No, it's our drain field.
The whole thing is a drain
The
field?
whole thing is our drain
Entire
field.
field? Okay.
Island life.
Yeah.
This is what happens when you love the architecture. So this whole I want to talk briefly about, before we run out of time, I do want to talk a little bit about support from the diocese, because that is a question that I have heard both from the vestry and Jenny has also asked if I will speak a little bit about what we do as we support congregations that are in transition. So one of my roles is to accompany congregations that are in transition, and so I serve as, at this point, the key point person and contact person for all of you, and especially for your wardens as they navigate this. There are a couple of others of us in the office of the bishop that do work with congregations, especially when it's time to do self-reflective work for congregations that are going to do a full-blown profile. And so we have some additional resources available, people resources available, if you would like some assistance as you discern ways of figuring out who you are in this moment and possible roles that you are discerning, and so we're happy to work with you guys on that. Part of my work is to meet with the vestry on an ongoing basis to support particularly the wardens as they move through this process. A lot of additional work goes on to wardens in this season of transition. And those of you who have been on vestries in the past in transition know this. So part of my role is to make sure that Brad has what Brad needs. I will encourage you guys to pray for your vestry and to pray for your wardens and to pray for whoever it is who's discerning. That is some of your role in this season. And then, once the vestry has come up with a profile, I will post it, and then I will have conversations with clergy who are interested. And I already am having conversations with clergy who are interested about this particular call. And then the bishop and I, as I said, will meet with everybody. We'll do a red flag check to make sure that we send you guys really good, solid, safe candidates. And then when it is time for the vestry to go through their discernment, then I will work with them to make sure that they have a process for how they do that. And then once the call is extended, then I will work with the vestry, particularly in the senior warden with the candidate who has been called as priest in charge, to make sure that there's a letter of agreement that is put into place, that the bishop is fine with that, and then everything will be signed and proverbially blessed. And then after the transition, and at that point, I will continue to stay in touch, as will our host land, who is the canon for congregational development, to make sure that there's a mutual ministry agreement that's put into place and that there's follow-up that's happening on an ongoing basis. So we are not absent from this process, and we also are trying to figure out the right way of being as involved as we can be, recognizing that me in particular have many different responsibilities, but this is one of the most critical responsibilities that I have, and I make that commitment to all of you to stay deeply engaged in this. I will also say that as a diocese, we are in this new season of ministry. The bishop's doing a lot of work with diocesan council and with the governing bodies at large and with the staff to discern what our mission is in this new season of ministry with him. And one of the things that has emerged is leaning into and the recognition of the critical recognition of how important it is to have healthy, vital congregations. Congregational development. Those of you, how many people here have been to CCD, to the College for Congregational Development? Okay, you guys did like.
We have a couple of others, but they're not
awesome.
here.
Okay. One of the things this diocese is known for across the church at large is the College for Congregational Development. Figuring out how we, as individual congregations and as the diocese, do the work of discerning who God is calling us to be and bringing into that. We have a curriculum that is offered multiple times throughout the year for people to participate in. And it's about figuring out how we can be faithful disciples of Jesus as individuals and as congregations. The thing I want to say is that the number one thing that congregations do that is congregational development is calling your priest. So if you do not make a good call, it's going to be much harder to be a healthy, vital congregation. And so this work that you guys are doing right now, this work that you have done with Jenny is absolutely necessary for congregational development and to be a good, healthy, vital congregation. So what you are doing right now is what the bishop wants every congregation to be doing so that it can faithfully live into who it is we are all being called to be as Jesus in this place right now. So I'll get off my preaching soapbox. Okay, we have 10 more minutes.
Another challenge, I can speak up. Another challenge
It's for the folks on the live stream.
that we have is we are a healthy congregation, and it has seemed almost not humanly possible for our rector to do all the rector things. And I know that we are starting to see in the diocese more deacon training happening. We are starting to see more curates coming. And I'm wondering if there's also talk about how to help congregations that are growing quickly be supportive. Helping we're not high enough to have an associate rector, but could we get some of those CDSB graduates or decided?
This is a big question. In fact, this is a question that Bishop and I are discerning right now. So curates, what we call clergy residents. So people who newly graduated from seminary and newly ordained. Each year there are 2 curates that are coming in the Diocese of Olympia, sometimes 3 if we have people from CDSB. Historically, those curates go to large congregations in Seattle. I am a product of that, having done a curacy at the cathedral. And the bishop and I, and this is one of the things I particularly appreciate about Phil, is that he, I think, wants to advocate for small congregations or congregations outside of the urban corridor. Because there's a lot of amazing ministry happening beyond Pierce, in Snohomish counties, and Kitsap County.
And
Island County is one of those places where there's good ministry happening. And one of the things that he and I are wondering about is how do we be creative about curacies beyond the 3-county area? And are there ways of having shared associates with other congregations or other things? So that's one thing. And deacons. We should have that conversation about deacons. There are 2 new archdeacons in this diocese, also very passionate about making sure that people who are discerning a diaconal call are supported in it and then can serve in congregations that are not just in the city of Seattle. So there's that. And then there's another thing that's happening, the Iona School, which is the formation of one of the ways that deacons and some priests are trained for ministry. They're going to start a new lay, so like a series of lay classes. TBD, I think maybe this fall and then actually maybe next spring, but there's going to be more opportunities for people to be involved. People who are discerning of the call to ordained ministry, and people who just want to know a little bit more about what does it mean to be faithful stewards of the ministry that we've been given. So yes to all of what, yes to your question. That's a really long answer too, I'm sorry. Okay. All right.
So we might have, I just always like to take a pause. Not everybody thinks of the questions right off the bat. And there have been a lot of good questions. But is there something that you're sort of mulling over, even if you don't know exactly what it is you want to ask, that has to do with this upcoming transition time, this decision that has now just been released around the priest in charge, next steps, partnership with the diocese, communication amongst ourselves in the congregation? I just want to take a moment to let those questions bubble up, to see if any are there.
The other thing I'm going to say is if you have not already had an opportunity to ask a question,
That's great. There's 2 hands. Thank you.
Thanks. This is just a clarification, but if the priest in charge process does not result in us calling, are we then at the same place we were yesterday? We then determine whether we want to go to another priest in charge process, or we switch to another?
correct. Yes, that is the way to think about it. And I will say too that of those 9 priests in charge who are deployed at this point, I have not heard from any of those congregations that they, or from those clergy for that matter, that there is not a match there. So we will navigate that if we cross that bridge, and yes, you are right, that is what that process would be. So thank you for asking. Okay.
So this is a semi-formed inquiry also. When we started our transition just a few years ago, and the canon for the ordinary came to be interim, we actually adjusted the size of our vestry because we knew we were going to have profile committee and a search committee and a full-time vestry who have plenty of work to do already. So when we elected this year's vestry, we're just laying tons more work on them, and they weren't we as a congregation didn't vote for those people to be making this huge of a decision. So I'm just wondering if it's typical, normal, or even permitted for the vestry to add members, or for the congregation to, I don't know, participate somehow, because the vestry's already got way too much to do.
So I'm part of the answer, and then I'm going to ask Brad to talk a little bit about congregational involvement. So I do not know of congregations adding vestry members or bishops' committee members when congregations go into transition. That's not to say that if the vestry makes the decision that it's time to expand the vestry, it can't happen, and the bylaws will say whether it's appropriate or not. But I would say trust the vestry on that, but also ask the question and support the vestry in that work. Maybe what I need to say is, yes, your vestry has a lot of work that they're doing. They're not the only ones who are called to ministry. Everyone in this place is called to ministry. And so this, in fact, may be the opportunity. If you've been wondering about a new ministry or curious about supporting another group in this congregation, this actually may be the time to say yes to that.
Here, here.
It is first century church, and this is first century church. So I think that's actually the way that I'm going to respond to that question. So, all right, and I'm going to ask you to say a little bit about what you're imagining for congregational involvement.
Come up here, so, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the reasons why the decision was also really clear for the vestry last night was because of who this congregation is. The decision was made because there is so much wonderful work that is happening here by all of you that we wanted to make sure we made a decision that was not going to crimp the hose of the work that's happening here. We wanted that work to continue to go forward. And we also know that, yes, no, the vestry does not do all of the work here by any means. It's all of us together, and that's one of the reasons why we're in a strong position to attract our next priest, because of all of the energy that exists here. So, yes, we have a lot of work to do. It's exciting work. It's missional work. We're in a good place. We're financially sound. It's a lot of work for all of us, but I can only speak for myself as a vestry member. I don't feel like it's all on the vestry. And I also believe that we have a lot of processes that we can use to engage in conversations with us, formally, informally, through a variety of means, to gather input, because the wisdom is in the congregation. And the wisdom is guided by the Holy Spirit as we engage in this discernment process. So I'm optimistic, I'm enthusiastic, and believe that we have the resources necessary to engage in the cause.
And I want to second what Brad just said. You already have what you need. And so it's a matter of figuring out how to hold space and to trust yourselves to do that discernment and to listen deeply for the stirring of the Spirit, which is already very much at work in this place and in every congregation in this diocese. So, okay.
Go catch it there.
Yeah, I know, exactly. I'm going to see if Jenny has anything else to say, and then we'll get ready to wrap it up.
So we're in the middle of a conversation. And so this is not an ending. This is a conversation that's already begun. The work has begun. We are going to continue on. And what I heard from you, Christy, is you are here conversation, and by virtue of the questions and presence of all of you today, I heard that we're all in it. And I cannot actually think of a better way to proceed. And I have to say, it's hard for me to know that I won't be in it, but I want to give just a thanks to everyone, to the vestry last night for this work that you've done, to you, Christy, to everyone here, to everyone who's not able to be here, to those who have joined via the live stream. And this has been recorded, so all of these questions people will have full access to. Gratitude. Thank you.
So I also want to extend gratitude to Jimmy, and you have done just amazing work in your time here. This is tender time, and I want to thank you for your willingness to enter into that tender time with a lot of grace, and also in a way that invites this congregation into the deep hope that is embedded in this place. So thank you for everything that you have done and that you will continue to do. And you have laid an amazing foundation on which there is so much growth that is going to happen. So thank you.
Can I take this out? Be gone. Okay, listen. No, did that sound too abrupt?
No. We'll do that. We have to do the dismissal. Then we know.
You gotta do the
Okay.
dismissal. We can do it.
What do we do? Oh, yeah. I'll do the dismissal. You do the blessing, I'll do the dismissal. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay.
So I go first. So I invite you to stand, and I actually think what is preferable if you're able, I think to be able to see one another. I'm sort of a fan of kind of moving out of the center space as much as possible. I realize it's awkward. The blessing that I am going to forget in this moment that we can go back to is the one that comes from Iona about, my friends, we are all on this pilgrim's way together. May the blessing of the one who accompanies us be upon you, be upon all of us in this community, today, tomorrow, and the day beyond, forever. May we recognize our connections with one another, with those who are here and with those who are not here. Always seeing this deep peace of Christ, the deep peace of this one who walks with us every step of the way. May that be the God who is with us in this time. Amen.
All right, friends, let us go forth rejoicing in the power of the Spirit.
Thanks be to God.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah. Can't nip those hallelujahs.